Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our audience here at USIP and to our friends joining us online. Thank you so much for joining us on the second day, on what has been a tremendous program on U.S. relations with Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and dealing with the legacies of war. I'm really pleased to welcome everybody to USIP this morning for a discussion of the future of U.S. relations with Vietnam as well as Cambodia and Laos. We have a terrific panel joining us on stage in just a moment. But first, we have a video from Ambassador Mark Napper in Hanoi. He wasn't able to join us live because he's been hosting the visit of Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink out there. There's been a ton of activity in the region lately, and this tremendous program is just one way in which we're seeing relations between these countries advance at a very complicated time. So welcome to everyone. Please roll the video, and then we'll get going with our terrific program this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to deliver remarks at this important event on reconciliation and peace in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, organized by the U.S. Institute of Peace. I am honored to have the chance to share the transformative story of the U.S.-Vietnam reconciliation journey and my vision for the future with all the esteemed guests here today who share a common interest in building peace by strengthening our trust in one another. The United States is looking forward to celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the comprehensive partnership between the United States and Vietnam next July. Since Presidents Obama and Vang signed this agreement in 2013, our relationship has grown by leaps and bounds. The Biden-Harris administration has a strong desire to see the relationship elevated to a strategic partnership because when you look at our close cooperation across so many fields, strategic more accurately describes the work we are already doing together. In 1995, the leaders of the United States and Vietnam normalized bilateral relations. This was a remarkable achievement considering just 20 years earlier, we were at war. Yet today, our nations are close partners with a friendship anchored in mutual respect and trust. The journey from 1975 to today was not an easy one. Our predecessors had to set aside their differences, acknowledge their shared painful history, and confront the legacies of war, rather than let old resentments fester. How did we do this? By taking concrete and meaningful action over decades to demonstrate goodwill and to build trust. In 1989, the United States government began an assistance program for persons with disabilities, which has grown exponentially over the last 30 years. In total, the United States government has provided more than $140 million in assistance for persons with disabilities. What started 3 decades ago as basic support for prosthetics has expanded to encompass a diverse range of assistance, from partnering to strengthen the legal and regulatory framework, to expanding health and social services for persons with disabilities. We are working hand in hand with the Ministry of National Defense to improve the quality of life of persons with significant disabilities in 8 provinces that were heavily sprayed with Agent Orange. Working together, we have made tremendous progress in bettering people's lives. This includes the passage of the National Law on Persons with Disabilities in 2010, establishing state-of-the-art rehabilitation services in Vietnam, and promoting the adoption of universal access criteria. This last, for example, resulted in 13 airports being made accessible for persons with disabilities. These are just a few examples of the transformative gains we have achieved together. Almost 50 years after the end of the war, Vietnam still has some of the highest rates of unexploded ordnance in the world. Since 1993, the U.S. government has contributed more than $185 million to address unexploded ordnance-related activities and is the leading mine action donor in the country. In Quang Tri province alone, U.S. implementing partners have removed more than 770,000 UXO items, cleared more than 250 square kilometers, educated hundreds of thousands about mine risks, and assisted thousands of UXO survivors. From 2018 to 2021, UXO-related casualties fell to 0. But unfortunately, as the 3 accidents that occurred this year show, there is still a lot of work to be done. And the United States is proud of our close cooperation at the national and provincial levels to develop Vietnam's expertise in clearing unexploded ordnance. We will continue to work with Vietnam so we can eventually declare Vietnam mine impact free. The U.S. government has also made a major commitment to Vietnam to remediate areas contaminated with dioxin. From 2012 to 2018, we remediated dioxin contamination at the Da Nang International Airport. And upon completion, we handed over 75 acres of clean land that is now being used for the expansion of Da Nang International Airport. This was a $110 million project that required us to pioneer new technology in thermal treatment. Building on lessons we learned from Da Nang, in 2018, we launched a project to remediate dioxin at the Bien Hoa Air Base, the primary Agent Orange storage and handling site during the U.S.-Vietnam War. This new project will be completed over a 10-year period, requiring roughly $450 million. Through these projects, we are helping to build the capacity of Vietnam to oversee the remediation of smaller sites of contamination in the future. The bedrock of U.S.-Vietnam military cooperation since the normalization of relations has been the joint effort to account for and recover the remains of 729 of the 1,973 American servicemen lost in Vietnam. Great strides have been made in accounting for U.S. war dead. However, conservative estimates indicate that there are hundreds of thousands of unaccounted for Vietnamese soldiers. This amount climbs to over 1 million when including civilians and other people affected by the tragedy of war. Vietnamese culture places enormous emphasis on family and ancestry. Without the closure that comes from giving proper burials to their ancestors, families who lost loved ones continue to suffer. In recognition of this fact, in 2021, another area of cooperation was added, the Vietnam Wartime Accounting Initiative, which will help Vietnam to account for their missing. This project consists of 6 discrete areas, ranging from building the capacity of Vietnam to analyze DNA samples, to digitizing war-related documents located in the United States, to interviewing and recording firsthand information from veterans in both countries. The strong comprehensive partnership that we share today is the result of countless actions taken over several decades, taken by dedicated individuals on both sides to address legacies of the past, while we also work together to address the challenges of the future. Today, our cooperation across diverse sectors is making our partnership even stronger. Together, we are building strong health systems that will be resilient against the health threats of tomorrow. Together, we are establishing strong people-to-people ties through exchange programs between U.S. and Vietnamese students and professionals. Together, we are building resilience to adapt to the impacts of climate change and reach our shared net zero emissions goals. And together, we are building a brighter future for the people of both countries. A close Vietnam-U.S. partnership will be vital to realizing a safe, secure, prosperous, and resilient Indo-Pacific region. The depth of our cooperation reflects an understanding that the Indo-Pacific region, which is already home to more than half of the world's people and nearly 2/3 of global economic activity, will only continue to grow in influence over the coming years. The United States and Vietnam share a common vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific with sea and skies governed by international law. Realizing this vision will require us to continue our work together into the future while engaging other like-minded countries in the region. Thank you very much.
I'd now like to welcome Ambassador Vang and Ambassador Jenkins to the stage. Please come up and join us. Ambassador Vang, come center. Just a few housekeeping notes for our audience. We will be doing Q&A after both panel sessions. That will be done with note cards that I hope are out there in the audience. So, and someone will be coming around to collect those, and then we'll do the Q&A via those note cards. So please be ready with your questions. Good morning, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to introduce you in turn and have you make remarks, and then we will shift to the Q&A. So my dear friend, Ambassador Vang, is known to anyone that's dealt with U.S.-Vietnam relations for many decades. He had a distinguished 38-year career in the Vietnamese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, rising to be Deputy Foreign Minister, a post he held for a long time, and concurrently he was the Vietnamese senior official for ASEAN. Actually, at the time that I was the senior official for ADMM, for the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, plus you were the senior official on the foreign ministry side, and we had the opportunity to do a lot of great work together. So it's a real privilege to have you with us. Ambassador Vang is now the president of the U.S.-Vietnam Society, which is a non-governmental entity dedicated to deepening U.S.-Vietnamese ties. And one of the things we always talked about was U.S.-Vietnam relations and also U.S.-ASEAN relations, especially with regards to your immediate neighbors. So welcome, Ambassador Vang, and over to you for your remarks, which you can do seated or from the podium, as you prefer.
Thank you very much, Vikram, for the kind words and kind introduction. And I would love to be together with Ambassador Jenkins. She was from Vietnam very recently and also involved with war legacy issue. My appreciation for all this one. Certainly, I would like first to say a few words of appreciation to USSIP for organizing this dialogue on war legacies and peace, and it was a great opportunity for us to get together, not only looking at at the past, how we have been doing, but also looking towards the future, and this section is very much for doing so. My topic will be focusing on Vietnam-U.S. relations and the future of that cooperation, including in the area of addressing war legacies. And I think that through that story, we can have experiences for other countries like Laos and Cambodia. Certainly, I will be focusing on 3 points. First, on the current relationship between Vietnam and the U.S. We have the strong foundations for our strong partnership. Second will be how the question of war legacy issue play in our relationship. And certainly my vision, a third part, is on the future of Vietnam-U.S. relations. Currently, Vietnam and U.S., we have a strong foundations for strong partnership, as I mentioned it. It has been built throughout nearly 30 years of our diplomatic relations since 1995. The relationship have been built on the guiding principles in our relationship that includes also mutual respect and mutual benefits, acknowledging also the respect for political system of each country, and that will be continue to be a very important principle for us to work together. On the political front, I think the relationship has been strongly improved throughout the 27 years that we have diplomatic relations. And in 2013, we established a comprehensive partnership which cover all areas of cooperation, including from political to diplomatic, and to economic and investment, and to security and defense, and certainly other fields including education, technology, tourism, or people-to-people exchange, which is very much an important part of our relationship. Throughout the years, we have regular exchange of visits, including at the highest level. Every U.S. president has been coming to Vietnam ever since. I was honored to assist 2 visits by President Obama and President Trump to Vietnam in 2016 and 2017. It was very much good. Let's talk about trade and economic cooperation. We have a good push for that one. Back in 1994 and 1995, trade volume between the 2 countries was about half a billion US dollars. But nowadays we have a total value of 112 billion US dollars, almost more than 200 times over. And it was great, and there's still room, a lot of space for us to continue to enhance further. On security and defense, we have enhanced our relationship, including also in the field of war legacies. Vietnam has been committed to work with the US, and the US has been lending a helping hand to Vietnam. That was very, very much also. We have been cooperating on the issue of peace and cooperation in Asia, and including working with ASEAN as well. And I think that we share the principle regarding maritime issues, including the South China Sea, or the Eastern Sea that we call it, freedom of navigation, peace and security, maritime security, and international law. That will be very much important. The second point is that how the war legacy issue play an important role in Vietnam-US relations. I think at the starting point, nations once at war was a lot of mishaps between us, and there need to be some efforts to heal the wounds of war. And so this was the first thing first, and the war legacy issue to be addressed, not only to heal the wounds, but more than that is to build trust and then to develop partnership between our two countries. I still remember that the veterans have been coming to Vietnam, the families of the soldiers of both sides have come together. They are the pressure of the relationship at the first point in time. And the Viet vets also include a lot of politicians, the congressmen in different areas. So healing the wounds of war is to heal the wounds for both the people involved, but also for the nations involved, the two countries of ours. And we have been doing a lot. Vietnam has, at the beginning, long before we established our relationship, cooperative actively and also effectively with the US on the MIA issue. The US also step by step enhanced cooperation with Vietnam in addressing the war legacy issues for Vietnam as well, including clearance of landmines and USO helping to clean the dioxin, including the major project in Da Nang and the ongoing project in Bien Hoa, and also helping the people that are victims of the war as well, that Ambassador McNamara has just mentioned. So together, this issue is more than just healing the wounds of war. It's a question of building trust and promote understanding between our two nations and our peoples, that we can get together addressing the past, but also, like Ambassador McNamara say, looking forward to work together towards the future. Third point is that I have strong belief for continued growth of the Vietnam-US relations. The next 3 years will be important for us. We have a lot of milestones to celebrate. Next year, 2023, as Ambassador McNamara just mentioned, we will have the 10th anniversary of comprehensive partnership. The year after next, 2024, will be 30 years of our normalization in the economic areas. And 2025 certainly will be the 30th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. And I think we have strong belief in raising further our relationship to the new height. Ambassador McNamara talked about strategic partnership. I've been writing and do a lot of interview in supporting this one also. So there must be a way for us to develop a roadmap for achieving something that already in place, that is the strategic and comprehensive nature of the partnership between Vietnam and the US. And throughout this one, I think the war legacy issue continues to be part of our partnership in moving further forward in the future. I will be stopping here, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Vang. And it really is interesting as we head to these next 2 years. We may see a good opportunity to further elevate the partnership. Next, we have Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins. Ambassador Jenkins is Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and has been a leader in the field of arms control and non-proliferation for several decades now. She, I think it's safe to say, from the State Department, led and really was the heft behind all of the nuclear security summits in the Obama administration, which were an effort that I think was somewhat prescient given what we see happening today, really a necessary global multilateral dialogue on profound security issues. She was legal advisor for the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. In between government stints, she led the Global Health Security Agenda Consortium's work on pandemic detection and mitigation. She's a thought leader across the board in national security and diplomacy. It's a real privilege to have her here. She's also been a professor at Georgetown, senior fellow at Brookings. The list goes on and on. Ambassador Jenkins, we really couldn't be more pleased. And she was just in Vietnam 3 weeks ago, so the timing is impeccable. Over to you for your role.
Hey, thank you.
I think you're welcome to do it.
Yeah, I think I'll stand up since I do have my remarks. It's a little easier to do it from here. Good morning. It's great to see everyone here, and I guess everyone who's online as well. As noted, I was in Vietnam about 3 weeks ago. My first time being there. I've always wanted to go, and it was a really great opportunity to visit, to soak up the culture, to meet the wonderful people there, and also to go to Quang Tri and see the work that's being done there. A lot of work that's being funded by the State Department, one of the bureaus that work within my area. So I have some, as always, government, we have our prepared remarks. And then, of course, we can have more of an exchange. I know that time is running fast, so I'll go through this. So I want to thank you for the introduction and to USIP for hosting this morning. This is very inspirational and important topic, and one that I feel very strongly about. It is an honor to be here on this panel with Ambassador Vinh and, of course, Ambassador Napper, who was on screen a little while ago, who I visited in Vietnam a few weeks ago, just before I traveled to Quang Tri province in central Vietnam to see the U.S.-funded projects to find and remove unexploded ordnances. So being here this morning is very timely, as already noted, but it also underscores how incredible it is that we can all sit here as partners, colleagues, and friends. In Quang Tri, I not only saw the incredible work being done to remove explosive hazards, but also the important work of reconciliation in action, and in particular, the resilience of the women demining team I had the pleasure of meeting. As the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security, I oversee the Bureaus of Political and Military Affairs, Arms Control, Verification and Compliance, and International Security and Nonproliferation. In addition to policy and programs for preventing the spread of weapons of mass destruction, our mission includes oversight of security assistance and defense trade, as well as deterring conflict and enhancing strategic stability. Since 1993, the United States has provided more than $665 million across East Asia and the Pacific to find unexploded ordnances, remove these dangerous items, and help communities heal and grow. This work is only possible because of the commitment of people, the people of Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, who conduct the dangerous work of finding and clearing landmines and unexploded ordnances. Their dedication and inspiration is very contagious, and I want to thank all of them. I want to also recognize the efforts of our partners in local governments and among the NGO community. It is because of leadership at mine action authorities and cooperation among implementing partners that our programs to clear explosive remnants of war have been successful. And because of this continued coordination among stakeholders, the United States has been able to provide historic levels of funding in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Last year alone, we provided more than $67 million to address unexploded ordnance issues in these 3 countries. And this year, we are on track to spend more than $75 million. Our commitment is also measured in impact. We want all people in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam to live safely and in peace. When I was in Quang Tri province in central Vietnam a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with some women deminers working with our implementing partners, Mines Advisory Group, Norwegian People's Aid, and Peace Trees Vietnam. These brave women took time out of their day to share their experiences with me as deminers in the field and leaders in their communities. I was in awe. One woman's comments was particularly moving. She said that her job as a deminer was her pride, because while the wars in Vietnam were over, she was contributing to ending pain in her community. She and the many women working as deminers personify the goals of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. However, we recognize that there is still a gender gap in security policy formulation and reform in many countries. Women are underrepresented at all levels in the national security decision-making process, but it was so inspiring to see the women I was talking to that day. Over the last 3 decades and across bipartisan lines, the United States has been trying to rectify this issue in our Congress and in political leadership and in our representation at the United Nations. Around the world, we need women meaningfully participating in decision-making at all levels to secure the prevention and resolution of conflicts. That is why I'm so proud of the work I saw in Quang Tri and throughout Southeast Asia. Clearing unexploded ordnances is foundational to our relationship because removing explosive hazards is a requirement for development. There is still much to do, but I am heartened by our progress on unexploded ordnance clearance and all war legacies issues. I would also like to mention how inspiring it is to see the progress of the U.S.-Vietnam relationship in less than 30 years since normalization. As Ambassador Napper mentioned, next year marks the 10th anniversary of our bilateral comprehensive partnership. This milestone offers a chance to reflect upon the many areas of shared interest between the United States and Vietnam. In particular, the United States and Vietnam are working together to promote stability and adherence to international law in the South China Sea, and we seek to push back on unlawful maritime claims in the region. We are proud that Vietnam now operates 2 former U.S. Coast Guard cutters, and we are excited to transfer a 3rd to help Vietnam secure its coastline. We are also working with our partners at Harvard, USIP, and the International Commission on Missing Persons to help Vietnam find its missing soldiers, as we had heard about already. We are also expanding our relationship in the non-proliferation field. Through the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation's Export Control and Border Security Program and the Department of Defense's Defense Threat Reduction Agency, we are working together to develop regulations and strengthen biological, chemical, radiological security across Vietnam's ports, border crossings, and institutions. For many years in Cambodia, communities remained impoverished because mines were scattered and left uncleared in farmlands. Access to agricultural activities were limited due to more than 3 decades of armed conflict. Today, in support of Cambodia's goal of becoming mine-free by 2025, the United States and Cambodia continue to cooperate to address war legacy issues, including the reduction of unexploded ordnances contamination, as well as accounting for missing U.S. service members. With United States support, Cambodia has experienced 2 decades of robust growth and made significant progress in advancing its sustainable development goals, including clearing millions of landmines and unexploded ordnances. In Laos, the United States has provided more than $310 million to clear and dispose of unexploded ordnances since our efforts started in 1995. Laos is severely affected by unexploded ordnances during the Indochina War, and the United States is working to make sure our unexploded ordinances support the government of Laos and its target to remove these ordinances as an obstacle to economic development by 2030. As you can see, the United States is dedicated to working with Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos to address these war legacy issues, help heal the wounds of the past, and support communities to thrive. These are only some of our many successes in our bilateral relationships. And because of the trust we have built between our governments by addressing the legacies of war, we have opportunities in new areas in this relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Jenkins, and I'm so glad you got to go out there. And what you didn't mention to the audience that you actually got to pull the trigger on the detonation of some unexploded ordnance, which is, really brings it home.
Yes, it does.
You think in real life about what that piece of ordnance might have done to a child or somebody, and you see that the impact, the real life impact of dealing with this very, very difficult problem, which as you noted, takes decades, and the United States has, over the years, continually increased its commitment to helping all three countries mitigate that risk. So thank you for going and highlighting it. And I love that you met with the women demining teams, which is also
That's great.
a really wonderful story. We're going to go to Q&A, so if you have questions, feel free to pass them. Jenny is walking up and down and collecting them, and while they work on that, I'll take the liberty of being the moderator to ask a few questions of my own. We focused this discussion on all three countries. But in some way, the legacy of war cooperation with Vietnam has truly led to a deep partnership, including in security assistance areas, strategic concerns with the region, concerns about the South China Sea, the East Sea, as the Vietnamese call it, and stability. It has not had that similar larger effect yet with Cambodia and Laos. And I thought I would turn to Ambassador Vang, who looks, very closely at the region. Vietnam has long viewed a partnership between these three countries as vital to Vietnamese national interests and security, but they also have differences with both Laos and Cambodia, particularly when it comes to China's role in their economy and protecting against some of the potential risks there. So first, Ambassador Vang, and then Ambassador Jenkins, if you care to reflect on China's role in the region a little bit, and maybe why we've seen so much progress with Vietnam, whereas with Cambodia and Laos, U.S. bilateral relations have had a harder time advancing.
Thank you, Vikram. Certainly, I can speak on the experiences of Vietnam, how we have been doing with the U.S. and China and other countries in the region. Certainly, with the U.S., at the beginning, not everything is good yet. At the beginning, even on the question of the war legacy issue, including the American MIAs, we have difficulties at first, how we approach the issue and how we work together, and a lot of doubts from both sides. But I think the earnest desire to cooperate, to heal the wounds of war, consider this issue of MIA or of other issues, including landmine clearance, as a humanitarian issue, starting from that. So the experience and the lesson here is that we start to address the war legacy issue not from a political point of view. It's more on the humanitarian side of the issue. And from that, we try to heal the wounds of war for both nations and for the peoples concerned. Through that, we develop a bridge of trust between our two nations. When we have trust, it's easier for us to work on a number of and expand our areas of cooperation. On other areas of cooperation, it depends on both sides on how we can work together. There is a conclusion for both of us, Vietnamese and Americans, when we work on the area of cooperation, we know that we have differences. But we also know there's a long list of commonalities that we can work together. So we talk about differences on how to bridge the gap, but we expand our cooperation on the list of priorities that we have common interests and common point of view. So on the issues of economy, we start to have a bilateral trade agreement, and we expand our trade relations. But at the same time, we can work together on regional issue, including trade as well. For example, we had been working together on the TPP, and now we are working together on the IPEF, on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. That helped us a lot. So through consultations, we know what are the differences that we must address. But at the same time, we know the commonalities that we can expand our cooperation. Point number 2 is that for us, Vietnam, we consider the US, China, or Japan continue to be important partners for us. Each one of our bilateral relations has a merit in it. So we deepen our relations without too much eyes on China or too much eyes on Japan, for example. So what we call the principal foreign policy is that we try to be independent, but at the same time be dimensional and multilateral, try to be friends with everybody. That's true in this case. We try to be partners with the US, we try to be partner with the Chinese, and we try to be partner with Indians and Japan and everybody. So the strong point here is that we can expand further our level of cooperation with the Americans while we continue to work with the Chinese. Sometimes there are difficult points. For example, the US and China is now in rivalry or in competition. What we can do with this one, I think Vietnam or other countries in ASEAN, we have a policy that we will not be taking sides. But to me, it's not about not taking sides. We need to act more proactively to work with everybody for peace, for stability, and for cooperation in the region, and to improve our bilateral relations based on our shared interests. So what we try to do is not only not to taking sides, but to work with the US, but not at the detrimental of a third party or anyone. And I think the Indo-Pacific strategy, with that the US do not ask other countries to choose between the US or China. That is a good point also, that the US has been approaching the region and ASEAN. And so it depends on your national interest on how you improve relationship with major powers, even when they have a competition. But to me, Vietnam has been try to improve and in expanding our relationship with both the US and China. When we have differences, we try to talk about differences, including also on the question of Eastern Sea or South China Sea. We base ourselves on the principles, and the principle has been shared by the ASEAN countries and other partners, including maritime security, peace, and rule-based order over there, including the respect for international law and UNCLOS. That will be very much important for us. Any dispute should be settled by peaceful means. That will be also very much important. So what we try to do is that, so I think we can have both good political and economic relations with China, but at the same time, we have strong foundations for our partnership with the Americans. Thank you.
I could only add just a little bit to what Ambassador Vang has said, because I think he's captured most of it. As you heard from my remarks, we have relationships in terms of the legacy of war, very close with Vietnam, continuing to strengthen with Cambodia and Laos. I'm not an expert on comparing how much we have in each, but I will say that one of my main messages when I went out to Vietnam and in Southeast Asia overall, was we want to strengthen our bilateral relationships. We want to find areas where we can continue to collaborate. So that's why a lot of my discussions in Vietnam were not only about landmines, but we're about, as we said, maritime security, aviation security, export controls, strategic trade. So we want to continue to expand the ways in which and the avenues in which we can work bilaterally. And that's the same with other countries as well. And so it's a matter of timing and getting things to get to the right place where we can continue to expand our work in addition with Cambodia and Laos, and I assume that that will happen in time. As far as the PRC's presence, I think it's very clear that the interest in Southeast Asia, their presence in Southeast Asia, the growing impact in the region. But very similar to what Ambassador Vang has said, our goal is our relationship with the countries. My focus is my relationship with Vietnam. And I understand that a lot of countries in the region are in a difficult situation with China and the United States. But our goal is not to create a situation where countries have to make a choice. It's their choice, and we just want to make sure that we have a good relationship, and we develop our programs and ways in which we can work together and develop trust and strengthen a partnership, and that's our main focus.
Yeah, that's great. I think yeah, the cooperation is not about generally about choosing, but about behaviors that are where there's shared concerns. So where there are decisions made by one country that are detrimental to the interests of others, and where we feel it the same way, then we seek to cooperate. So, for example, in the South China Sea. But I think the United States also doesn't want to have to choose. We'd like to continue to have a constructive economic partnership with China, even if we have elements of competition in that relationship. So, Andrew is going to serve as the question coordinator. So, go ahead.
We received many excellent questions from the audience, so I will try to put them together. And it's around the question of a strategic partnership or strategic roadmap, as Ambassador Vang mentioned, for U.S.-Vietnam relations. What will it take to reach that? What are obstacles to it that the two countries need to work together on? And what are roles for Vietnamese Americans in bringing that about?
I think that's to you, Ambassador Vang. What does it take to get to a strategic partnership, to elevate the partnership?
Actually, to me, I consider our partnership has both the strategic and comprehensive element in it. We have expanded our relationship from political and diplomatic to economic, investment, trade, and to security and defense issues in all areas that has been. So the question here is that I think during my time as ambassador here, and we have Ambassador Ted Osius and Dan Christenbrink in Hanoi, we have been discussing on this one. There are a number of ways. One suggestion is that we already have the substance of everything over there. Do we need to put a name on it just for the sake of the names only? That is one point. The second point is that, we have reached that level, put a right name on it. That has been correct also. And another one is that, what would be the name, different names at different levels? Not actually, because Japan, China, or Russia, or India, we have different names. And that can be the meaning of strategy. So my point of view is that we have reached the level of having both comprehensive and strategic nature of our partnership. And both sides are working on further strengthening that one. That is the most important thing. Now, how to put a name on this one? I think we need to get together and to talk about it. What would be the right name? Strategic doesn't mean anything, but the full name of all this one, someone say, the Japanese guys, we call it enhanced strategic partnership or something like that, or strategic partnership for peace and development and cooperation. So I think we need to talk on that one. But certainly we agree that, for me personally, I agree that we have reached that level and we need to have a name for it. And what we try to do is to have talks between the two sides and have recommendations from all of us here, convincing both sides that we need to reach some name for it, especially next year when we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the comprehensive partnership.
So I think that means for the diaspora, send in some suggestions. We'll get them through Ambassador Vang into the formal process.
But just to add, I mean, I think as the ambassador was saying, whatever you call it. I mean, I think having these exchanges, my visit to Vietnam, Assistant Secretary's current visit there, the exchanges, the building of relationships, the building of programs we could do together. This is the process, and we're in that process. So, what does it mean when we get there? I think the important thing is the process of getting there, and that's what we're doing right now. So.
We have about 5 minutes, so maybe Andrew, you can do a couple more.
Yeah, another topic of questions has to do with the example of U.S.-Vietnam relations as it can apply to other countries. So on questions such as international peace and security, nuclear issues, regional cooperation, working with the UN, how can the example of U.S.-Vietnam relations extend to these other issues in foreign policy?
Ambassador Jenkins, you want to?
I think it's about, we always try to learn from experiences and learn from relationships and build on what successes and, try to stay away from things that are not as successful. And I think in general, looking at the relationship that we have, we're developing, because we're still developing more in terms of our relationship with Vietnam and continuing to build the trust and the belief in what we can do together. I mean, that's how you use that for other situations. Of course, you have to modify it depending on which situation you are in, what multilateral engagement you're involved in. But it's really just taking that and building it and using it in other situations, but understanding there's different cultures and different ways of looking at the world. But, there are some things that you can take forward. So the process of developing a stronger bilateral relationship is something that we can use in other cases where we're trying to do the same thing with other countries. And I think that we are having successes, and we've had this relationship for many years already. So we have a template that we have to modify, obviously, to different cultures and different regions. But I think that's what we try to do in diplomacy, and that's what we try to do. You don't always have to start from scratch.
One key in policy, if I might add, is about UN peacekeeping. That is a case in point. The US has been starting a program to assist us in training our people in participating in UN peacekeeping missions in Africa. And it was very much good. We're starting to send first the medical personnel to Africa, but nowadays we can send engineering people over there. And it was very much good, and the program is now expanded to receive not only assistance from the US, but from Australia and other countries as well. I think we have a common point of view here. Vietnam wants to be part of the peacekeeping mission by the UN, and we have our requests for assistance. The US can have a technical assistance, the Australians can have a medical assistance, and whatever way that we do. This is very much good. If I can talk more about Vietnam-US relations, I think not only important is between government to government relations, but in our case between Vietnam and the US, people to people relations very much important. The starting point and during the time of our relationship on the question of addressing the world legacy issues as well. We have a lot of people, organizations that have been participating in assisting our two countries and assisting Vietnam on that one. I have a list of names of the veteran organizations and people's organizations like VVAF, VVA, VVMF, VFW, the Veteran for Peace or the Fourth Foundation or the Peace Tree Vietnam or Renew Vietnam. All these people organizations and the veterans organization, they have been very much a helping hand for us. So if that experience can apply in other countries, not only government-to-government relations, sometimes politically difficult, we have the people-to-people relations that can help promote an environment that the government can be easier to do with each other. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just one more thing. I mean, while we were in Quang Tri, one of the things that came up repeatedly is how we can use that in other places, you know, in Vietnam and other places. And of course, we have some of our NGOs, like Halo and others, and Peace Tree, as we talked about, but some of them are in other parts of Vietnam, but other parts of the world. So we're constantly looking at what's working and how we can do it in other places.
Well, unfortunately, we could go on, but we have come to time. I think it's a wonderful place to end with this idea of the foundation being people-to-people ties. I don't think any of the progress we've seen in this relationship would have happened without veterans, combatants on both sides, people who fought each other, deciding they wanted a different future and coming together informally first and then building this infrastructure on which we've really based this relationship. So I think that's a wonderful place to end. I can't thank both of you enough. It's been a real pleasure, and we will now broaden out to a little wider lens on the region with our next speakers. Thank you both, and give them a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Great. Shall we?
Thank you, Ambassador. What a pleasure. Transition as quickly as we can, though we're going to swap out some water. Hi.
Hi.
Terrific. Thanks, guys, for joining us. And thank you all again for being with us. Once again, I'm Vikram Singh. This is day 2 of our project on legacies of war and U.S. relations with Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And for our second panel this morning, I'm very pleased to welcome Phuong Vu, who is actually currently working with us here at USIP. Phuong is an expert on armed conflict, democratic peace, looks at how combatants engage in bargaining, in conflict, and in peace processes. She is a former journalist and looks extensively at U.S.-Vietnam relations and served previously at the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi. She'll be our first speaker, and then Brian, and we're going to use this as an opportunity to broaden the lens. So Phuong, please go ahead with your opening remarks, and then we'll switch to Brian and have a chat.
Thank you, Vikram. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here, having me today. And I'm very pleased and honored to be here to share with you some honor and humble thoughts about the future of U.S. relations with Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. When Andrew invited me to speak in this plenary about the future of U.S. relations with Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, I had immediate questions about what the questions really is. Is it about the U.S. Relations with individual countries, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, or the U.S. relations with these 3 countries as a group? So that question took me back to my first year at the Military Science Academy. Back then, I was on the campus sharing with some Lao and Cambodian students who were military officials on training in Vietnam. What struck me a lot when I reflect on my time back then I didn't see them as foreigners at all. And nobody told us to take precautions or watch for malus in their behaviors or presence. So we were so comfortable together. And when years passed by, I learned that Vietnam is top policy, and the policy has been consistently implemented. That Vietnam attaches importance to the development of friendly, traditional, and constructive relations with neighboring countries. And Vietnam attaches high importance to their relations with Laos and Cambodia, and put the relations between Vietnam and Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia in contemporary politics. It even plays in even more important roles. So I would like to approach the questions of the futures of the U.S. relations with Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia with the concept of perception. It's about the perceptions of relations and perceptions of policy design and public awareness. So first of all, it's about the perceptions of U.S. relations with the three countries. So you know that over the last sessions we attended yesterday, we all know about the shared history and experience of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So I'm not going to take your time elaborating on those points. But contemporarily, Vietnam has been facing increasing challenges in terms of security and regional challenges. Laos and Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia share borders that in case some conflicts or war happened, or Laos survivals or Cambodia's survival politically, economically threatened, Vietnam would be extremely concerned. And you know, the three countries, as I've known of, they share an dual brotherhood. So I do believe that a common grand strategy for Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia of the United States would be necessary. It's a good approach to develop and build trust with not only Vietnam but the other brothers of Vietnam. It's important. You know that in terms of war legacies and reconciliation, we have been witnessing so many efforts that both Vietnamese and American governments, also NGOs, who have worked long and hard to achieve what we happily seen today. However, in some corners of our society, especially in Vietnam, we heard something about transactional relationship, because so far Vietnam, among the three countries, they got the most attention from the United States, and some people, they doubted that the United States invested so much in war legacies and reconciliation with Vietnam, because the United States so far needs Vietnam's support in enhancing and strengthening their presence in the Asia Pacific, as well as to achieve some grand roles in the region. So from my point of view, I think war legacies, reconciliation between two countries is important to strengthen trust, mutual trust between two countries. But if you take a step back to see the brotherhood that Vietnam shares with Laos and Cambodia, I think it's important if the United States considers to build trust with Vietnam from a deeper level, that the United States will build trust with Laos and Cambodia. By doing so, the United States will be very proud to tell the world that the act of the investment in war legacy and reconciliation is a true act of responsibility and humanity, instead of some national interest that the United States is pursuing at the moment of speaking. The second point I would like to touch on is about the the perceptions of policy design and public awareness. I've heard yesterday about the fund allocations and the project implementation in the field. I was surprised because I was not in this field so far as many groups and people who have been working in this field for 20 or 10 years. But in my communities, well, back in Vietnam, when I was talking to some people who work in the field, they expressed some concern that Laos and Cambodia have been forgotten in World Legacy efforts of the United States. However, in the closing discussions, what I heard about is that the United States clearly have a good intention of invested more in those countries, but the allocation and the implementation of those projects got some management problem or some problem with local capacity to absorb capital. But in other discussion, I also heard some voices from Laos and Cambodia. Lao and Cambodian people, they worry and they are calling for more attention from the United States in terms of World Legacy and reconciliation. So we clearly can see the discrepancies between public awareness and the policy design. So what I'm talking about at this point, and that brings me up to some policy implication for the United States, and of course be aware that I'm suggesting some policy with my capacity as a research fellow, not a Vietnam consultant with USIP. So the first one is, I think, the United States could be benefit a lot if they can develop a strategy for Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia as a group of who share a dual brotherhood. That's a new way of build the mutual trust and multilateral trust. The second one is about to give Laos and Cambodia a stronger sense of relevance. And the third one is about to address public awareness instead of us. Okay, I think I really appreciate that we're gathering in DC talking about this issue. But I think it would be even more promising if we can do this kind of dialogues in one of those countries in turn, like this year we're doing DC, next year we're doing Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, where we can have access to local voices directly, and we can hear from people on the ground who are suffering the consequences of war better. And that's what I thought. And to conclude, I think the future of the U.S. relations with Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia depends on how the United States prepares for sustained commitments to these three countries individually, as well as to this group of three countries in the long haul.
Thank you, Dr. Vu. That's really a helpful overview and helps us start thinking about the region as a whole. Turn now to Brian Eiler. Brian runs the Southeast Asia program and the Energy, Water, and Sustainability program at the Stimson Center. He's truly, I think, in my professional life, talking about Mekong, River Basin, there's no one I know that knows more, actually, Brian. Spent about 15 years in the field, living in China and going up and down to all the Mekong countries, researching and talking to people. So, that's one of the areas most important to multilateral cooperation and potentially multilateral conflict in this region. Really, we're privileged to have you with us as well. And Brian, over to you for some opening remarks.
Thanks, Vikram. And I want to thank Andrew and Brian for the opportunity to speak here at this conference. I'm going to give hopefully a quick talk so we have time for discussion and questions from all of you about common challenges, vulnerabilities, and sensitivities in mainland Southeast Asia, within Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, and within the broader kind of global relationship and what the U.S. can do to address some of these vulnerabilities and sensitivities, as well as the common challenges. So to start, I want to reflect a bit on Michael Schiffer's remarks yesterday. Michael Schiffer from USAID, who very rightly emphasized how USAID's approach to war legacies in Vietnam has become very much people-centered. Now, we remember through Ambassador Vin's remarks how it started out as a people-centered effort, right? It was civil society groups here in the United States joining with civil society groups in Vietnam to kick off the war legacies effort. But then national governments got involved and a top-down approach, we started from a top-down approach with this. But over the last decade plus, it has become more and more people-centered, particularly now with the focus on victims assistance and disabilities assistance to the people who experienced the war and are still experiencing the war, that we're now able to fully address that situation of the individual and address needs on the ground through real action. And it's that action and the progress that's been achieved through war legacies that really has formed the cornerstone of the U.S.-Vietnam relationship. And it's created so many spillover effects, positive spillover effects for the two countries that we've learned about today and yesterday, and we all enjoy those positive spillover effects. Specifically, I can think for Vietnam, some of the positive spillover effects is good governance. War legacies engagement has improved governance in Vietnam. I'm often, when I'm speaking with people about war legacies action in Vietnam, you hear about how provincial level authorities are doing this or that, or civil society groups are acting with provincial level authorities and the national authorities in Vietnam to achieve impact. Around the world, we struggle with national-local relations, right? This is kind of a global governance issue. But the war legacies issue area is one that has strengthened national-local governance in Vietnam, and some of that's done through regulatory improvements. So this particular area has also created a regulatory effect that's very positive and endogenous in Vietnam. Civil society. This issue area has demonstrated how domestic civil society can be involved in addressing a very important issue, given the needs that are on the ground and giving the capabilities that are on the ground, and identify pathways to build capacity within civil society groups in Vietnam to address these issues. And that's done through U.S. engagement, but also through, coming back to how this got started, civil society engagement in an international scope. So these are some of the positive spillover effects that war legacies engagement can achieve in other countries too. So now we're going to pivot to Cambodia and Laos. And think, coming back to the China issue, coming back to U.S. knowing that these two countries are very important for engagement in ASEAN, but struggling to think about ways to engage positively there and to meet needs as they are being articulated in Laos and Cambodia. There's a struggle. At the same time, China's rise, and I will argue it's PRC overreach, and this is a term that I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about in the coming weeks and months. Professor Susan Shirk at UC San Diego is publishing a book about PRC and Xi Jinping's overreach and the intended and unintended consequences of PRC action in the maritime space with the Belt and Road and international organizations, and how we're all struggling to deal with that overreach. I cannot think of two other countries in the world that are dealing with the vulnerabilities of PRC overreach than Laos and Cambodia right now. And they're struggling with the governance challenges that poses. Laos is in a debt crisis. Severe inflation has been on the rise in Laos. Governance challenges related to international crime and illicit crime. On Twitter, if you follow UNODC's accounts, you'll see just almost every day there are these possessions of meth and other drug cases that just eclipse each other each time. There's just more and more found and brought in, and it's causing societal and a lot of societal pains in Laos. In Cambodia, one, a climate exposed country, one of the most climate exposed countries in the world. Cambodia has said that it will not be able to graduate into middle income country status because of the climate challenge. And there are investments in infrastructure that are related to the PRC and some that are not, that are exacerbating climate challenges. You just go to Phnom Penh and see what I'm talking about. As well as what we're learning about scam compounds in Cambodia and criminality, that again, it's part of PRC's rise in the region, for better, for worse, unintended consequences, perhaps. But these vulnerabilities are exposing the governance challenges in those two countries. So where I can only imagine if I were a Lao official in the foreign ministry or a Cambodian official in the foreign ministry looking at Vietnam's success with the United States, that there are people there saying, you know, Vietnam is a champion of the discourse of not having to choose, right? Vietnam has balanced these two relationships very well and benefits from them. Vietnam is vulnerable to China's rise as well, but has a toolbox and a structure to deal with those vulnerabilities and to reach out to friends and partners to help balance and reduce those vulnerabilities. And while we do hear articulations from Laos and Cambodia on these vulnerabilities, I bet that the conversations are happening and there's a turn and a pivot, not to the United States from Laos and Cambodia for support, but it's to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. It's to the brotherhood relationship between this triad of countries where there's a conversation on how to adapt to vulnerabilities happening. So I just want to outline 3 opportunities that I think the United States can deepen engagement and reduce these vulnerabilities in these countries. 1, pragmatic engagement on war legacies. It's a great place to start. And we do have programs and engagement on these issues in Laos and Cambodia. But if we can see it as a common challenge and transfer that experience of creating good governance, strengthening local and national ties, bringing in civil society actors, international to local, in this space, then the spillover effects will occur. When we think about what's happened recently, George Black, Susan Hammond, Jackie Chagnon, and Lao marched up and down the mountains of southern Laos to document Agent Orange exposure in Laos and to take evidence to the government of Laos and to the government of the United States to demonstrate how that exposure is affecting lives in Laos. And now for the first time, the US government is dedicating resources after Laos has expressed, the government of Laos has expressed a need to address these resources for a study on exposure to Agent Orange in Laos. Ambassador Keo Cheo, who we're going to hear from very soon, when he first arrived here in Washington, gave a series of talks about war legacies engagement in Cambodia. That's a strong signal of interest and need where the United States can deepen engagement. And from that, it might take 15 years. But look at where we were 15, 20 years ago with Vietnam, and look at where we are now and the deep trust and friendship that exists between our two countries, and our ability to have honest conversations and to think through problem solving in a toolbox approach to dealing with these vulnerabilities. The second area is on climate. And I'll just highlight 2 areas. So the second area is on climate. And my teammate Courtney Weatherby just served as lead author on a study on how Vietnam can meet its COP26 climate goals through stronger engagement with Laos and Cambodia. Now that might be counterintuitive because we often think about meeting your climate goals from a domestic perspective, but regionally this can happen too, and there's a role for the United States in this as well. And part of the solution is taking Vietnam's impressive experience with expanding solar investment within its own borders to these countries of Cambodia and Laos, importing some of that power back into Vietnam, and that will help with COP26 commitments. But importantly, choosing the right investments that also pay off for Vietnam downstream in the Mekong. So coming back into the Mekong. So there are ways to build dams in the Mekong that have fewer impacts than poorly sited and poorly built and poorly operated dams. And Vietnam can take part of that solution to Cambodia and Laos to unlock this opportunity. There's a role for the United States in capacity building on how to do this, because we struggle with this too, how to optimize the operation of our own water assets in a way that reduces vulnerability downstreams. And I think we're going to be dealing with these challenges in a very common way when we think about what's happening in the Colorado River Basin, and we can apply that to the Mekong as well with capacity building, with exchanges, et cetera. And also opening, another main point of this report is to open lanes for foreign investment in Vietnam for power generation assets. And I think the United States will have a lot of opportunity there. And that can also be transferred to Cambodia and Laos as well, which we know are both wide open for foreign investment in power generation. And the final point within the climate space is, and this is getting to sensitivities, is that it's not going to get any easier in the climate space. This is an area where we can engage, but there's an urgency to work within the climate space in Southeast Asia. I noted Cambodia's comment about being unable to graduate to middle-income country status because of the climate challenge. This is a country that produces a good portion of the world's freshwater fish catch. The Tonle Sap Lake is responsible for 500,000 tons of fish per year, and that's connected to the Mekong River. That is 4 times as much as what North America's rivers and lakes combined, just coming out of that one lake in Cambodia. And this is a food security guarantor for that country. Wow. Now, the fishery of that lake is under threat. It's under threat by both climate and upstream dams. And what the United States has done through the Mekong-US Partnership and through its Mekong Water Data Initiative is begun to demonstrate with evidence what the impacts of those upstream dams are to the downstream. This is evidence. It's sensitive because a lot of it is about China's dam operations, but we're getting used to it, and we're knowing a lot more about what those dams are doing to the downstream and how they're impacting the Mekong Delta. And moving from a conversation about sensitivities and controversy about upstream dams to one where data informs planning and decision-making processes that can help us reduce vulnerabilities, forecast for the future, and reduce some of these food security threats. So that's an example, I think, that we need to work on, a final example we need to work on to demonstrate how data and evidence can drive change. And coming back to close with War Legacies, we did that with War Legacies, right? We worked together to find the data, find the evidence, come up with common practices to achieve these impacts. Let's work together within Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam to deepen those impacts. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. Thank you both. Really insightful comments and a lot of ideas of how we could build on the U.S.-Vietnam experience, extend to both other countries. If you have questions, once again, cards have been gone around. Jenny is walking around still, so if you didn't get a chance, you can go for it. We have about 6 or 7 minutes for questions. I'm going to turn right to Andrew and fire away.
So yesterday at the UN, Vietnam was elected to the Human Rights Council for the next term. Human rights is often thought of as an obstacle in U.S. relations with Vietnam as well as Laos and Cambodia. Do you think there are ways this can also be an opportunity? And also among the 3 countries, as one question points out, the U.S. has historically been more critical in Cambodia than in the other countries. What does that say about our relations there and lessons that we might draw for democracy and governance? Thanks.
Dr. Wu, human rights potentially a good contribute rather than just an obstacle?
Yes, I think that question is a recurring theme whenever somebody talking about the futures of U.S.-Vietnam's relations, and also U.S. and Cambodia relations and human rights issues. That question reminds me of Secretary Chuck Hagel yesterday at luncheon. I remembered him saying that in order to move forward, we should be focusing on what we can agree rather than what we disagree. Of course, human rights advancement is something that is not going to happen overnight. But I think when the international community keep watching out and observing human rights practices in these countries is a good one that signal a strong sense of scrutiny, public scrutiny in these countries. And I think that's the one I would like to see in the coming years also. What do you think, Brian?
Just a thought on Cambodia. I think that the world is bracing for a coming watershed moment in Cambodian politics in the next few years, and that is one that the U.S. can. It has to do with Hun Sen's retirement and secession, and that's one that the U.S. can be ready for. With stronger engagement on civil society and also deepening engagement on war legacies to be better positioned when that happens and to better positioned to strengthen governance and strengthen democratic structures when that happens. Or we can stick to the humanitarian or the human rights discourse that kind of dominates on the Hill about Cambodia and do nothing until that happens. So I think there are good choices we can make now to lay a foundation for a stronger human rights future for Cambodia. It's very likely in the cards.
Thank you.
Second question is about generational change. So U.S. relations with Vietnam as well as Cambodia and Laos has been led over the past decades by the veterans and war generation. Now many of them are retiring, and there's a question about transition also among U.S. leaders. Do you think the younger generation in Congress and in the U.S. can continue this process and take leadership on reconciliation and war legacies?
And actually, Andrew, give us one more if you have it, because we only got about 2 minutes, guys.
One more is about how Brian sees Vietnamese cooperation with Cambodia and Laos on environmental and energy issues changing in the last few years.
So young people in Vietnam cooperating with its neighbors on energy and environment.
I think to answer, before answering these questions, I would like to really compliment and appreciate what the United States Institute of Peace has been doing. What they have been doing is to inspire the young generations who get involved with this one. Like for the upcoming visits of Senator Legacies to Vietnam, the Institute is organizing some workshops that involves with many young people, students who are interested in developing and advancing the relations between Vietnam and the United States. I think that's a good one that I would be very much welcome some other institutions or NGOs to engage with young people like what the USIP has been doing. And I truly believe that an inspired generations of young people will be a great helping hand in keeping the momentum moving forward.
So to be brief, I think young Congress people, young people in the United States are, the hot issues are climate and social justice right now. And the war legacies issue at heart is a social justice issue. So that is, there's convergence if we can educate Americans about the social justice needs that are created by war legacies issues in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. This was one way to carry the torch and to pass that torch on. Climate also. The climate challenges to war legacies are only going to increase as stuff gets moved around, projects are delayed due to intense storms and prolonged storms, and people are moved around into areas where they weren't living before and therefore could be more exposed to war legacies issues that haven't been addressed. So those are two areas where, again, there's a common challenge, there's common interest that can be focused on. And Vietnam has really improved and kind of upped its foreign policy game with Cambodia and Laos on on energy and water security over the last few years. I think, though, that there's an urgency to create some strategic investments that are demonstrative that you can invest in power generation in Laos that will not impact the Mekong Delta downstream. And I can draw on 2 examples of the opposite, and I won't go into the details, but instead of investing in projects that do deliver impacts to the downstream, and this is where the United States and other development partners can come in, identify those particular power generation assets in those other countries you can invest in, help those countries grow, that don't impact your environmental outcomes downstream as well.
We are out of time. That was a very rich discussion. I wish I could do about 3 or 4 more follow-up questions. I want to thank our audience. Please give our speakers a big round of applause. And we will be going to a 30-minute coffee break before the next event. Thank you all very, very much. A lot to build on here.
Thank you. Thank you.